Order. Order. I call this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee for Community Services. I'm Melissa Sheehy-Richard, and I'm the MLA for Hants West and chair of this committee. Today, we will hear from presenters regarding support for community centers, infrastructure, and facilities. I'd like to remind everybody to please put your phones on silent, and in case of emergency, we'll be using the Granville Street exit and walking up to Parade Square. I would now ask the committee members to introduce themselves for the record by stating their name and constituency, and beginning with MLA Ritzie.
Good morning, everyone. Dave Ritzie, MLA for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Good morning, Larry Harrison, MLA for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Good morning, Danielle Barcos, Chester St. Margaret's.
Good morning and welcome, Tom Taggart, MLA for Colchester North.
Hey, Gary Burrell, Halifax, Chebucto.
Good morning, Lisa LaChance, Halifax, Little Sable Island.
Good morning, Laura Lee Nickel, Cole Harbour, Dartmouth.
Good morning, MLA Carmen Kerr from Annapolis.
And I also would like to note the presence of Legislative Counsel Aaron Fowler and also our Legislative Assembly Clerk Tamer Nusabi. At this point, I would like to welcome the witnesses and ask that they introduce themselves, and then I will welcome you to bring your opening remarks. Deputy Minister Huston.
Hi, Deputy Minister Justin Huston. I'm the Deputy responsible for Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage, as well as the Office of Ulnu Affairs.
Mr. Greenlaw.
Hi, Bill Greenlaw. I'm the Executive Director for Community, Sport, and Recreation.
At this point, I would open the floor to Deputy Minister Huston to bring his opening remarks.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having us. I was talking earlier, this is my third week in a row, so it's nice to see some familiar faces around the table. I'm here as well, as you know, with Bill Greenlaw here from Community Sport and Recreation. And as we were kind of joking earlier, it's a year as of yesterday, we were here presenting on a similar topic. So we're really excited to share progress on our community improvement grants and programs. So I'll use my opening time to provide a little bit of an overview, and then Bill will provide some more detail about the programming, and then we'll be ready to answer any questions you may have. So as many of you know, at the heart of the work at Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage are our commitment to supporting Nova Scotians and our vibrant communities. We're proud to say that a substantial part of our budget, around $91 million, is going straight into community projects through our various 77 grants and funding programs. Our programs cover a wide spectrum from sports and recreation to the arts, specific initiatives for African Nova Scotian and Mi'kmaq communities, supporting language initiatives for French and Gaelic speakers, and promoting active living to foster healthier communities. For today's topic of discussion, the support of community centers, infrastructures, and facilities, we're going to highlight the programs and grants that support these areas. In 22-23, we provided $5.8 million for infrastructure programs and helped 180 community organizations. These investments in community infrastructure have social, environmental, and economic benefits. They support the construction of hard assets in communities like trails, rinks, legions, and community centers, but they also offer important community benefits that aren't as easy to see, like helping to bring important services to people. Let's take a look at our Community Facilities Improvement Program, or CFIP, as an example. This program supports projects that are led by the community and improve how people use public spaces. Whether it's fixing up a community hall or making a cultural center better, the Community Facilities Improvement Program helps make our communities livelier and stronger by funding these projects. In the fiscal year of 2023-24, we got actually 141 applications, which is the most ever we've received. This shows that more and more people and communities are recognizing the program and really need this kind of help. Innovation is key to addressing community needs. Take the Connect 2 grant program, for example. It champions healthier, eco-friendly transport options like walking, cycling, and wheeling, encouraging people to consider alternatives to driving for short trips. A good example of this initiative is in the town of New Glasgow, which received $49,000 through Connect 2 to optimize paths commonly used by the community. This project not only increases connectivity for residents of an historically African Nova Scotian community and a senior living complex, but also aligns with the town's active transportation strategy, showcasing the program's impact on local infrastructure and community well-being. For fiscal year 24-25, we're allocating $400,000 to push these initiatives further, showcasing our investment in well-being and environmental health of our communities. Reflecting on 2023, Nova Scotia faced its share of natural disasters, from Hurricane Fiona to wildfires in Shelburne County and Tintagel and extensive flooding. Our department quickly stepped up, mobilized resources, making our facilities such as museums and visitor information centers available to support the community needs during these crises. In response to the impacts on our infrastructure, we've ramped up our support to help communities adapt and recover. This includes facilitating access to repair funding through initiatives like the Federal Disaster Financial Assistance Fund. Our team is better prepared to act fast in these crises because of the strong ties that we have with community and our flexible way of creating programs. A good example of this is how quickly we started the generator program after Hurricane Fiona. The growing effects of climate change have made it essential for us to come up with a planned approach. Working together with the Department of Environment and Climate Change, the department has created a climate adaptation strategy. This strategy is backed by substantial investments in sustainable community infrastructure, highlighted by projects such as the DeCoste Center, Glace Bay Youth and Community Center, and the new Resiliency Center in Millbrook First Nation. CCTH not only supports our communities to better withstand and recover from the effects of climate change, but we also search to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in our grant programming. As a result, we have set up a strong structure that emphasizes fair access and the development of capacities within communities that are actively seeking equity and equality. This commitment leads to specialized grant programs such as the Mi'kmaq Cultural Activities Program, the Diversity and Community Capacity Fund, and the Cultural Communities Identity Fund. Each program is designed to promote the growth of community culture, build capacity to get organized, and celebrate Nova Scotia's diverse cultural identities. The programs contribute up to 75% of project costs. Arts Nova Scotia enhances these efforts with equity-focused initiatives, including the Mi'kmaq Arts Program, and providing access support for projects by individuals or groups facing barriers. In partnership with African Nova Scotian Affairs, we're tackling racism and improving access to government programs for African Nova Scotians through initiatives like the African Nova Scotian Road to Economic Prosperity Plan. CCTH has integrated equity, diversity, and inclusion and access, or EDIA, principles throughout our grant lifecycle, from application to assessment, ensuring a comprehensive approach to supporting underserved and equity-seeking groups. This includes embedding EDIA questions and self-identification queries in applications, developing an EDIA framework and lens tool for staff assessments, and compiling resources to build internal and external capacity. For example, our work in sports and recreation, including anti-racism and safe sport initiatives, is making these activities more inclusive and welcoming for everyone, and Bill can explain further. I would just like to mention the province allocated $18.3 million towards enhancing sports facilities. Of this, $8.2 million were directed to create a hockey hub for women and girls at the Canada Games Complex at Cape Breton University. This investment aims to boost the hockey participation among girls and women and to improve facilities for all users. Part of these investments also includes $4.3 million for the Cape Breton County Arena for modernizing amenities and improving accessibility and energy efficiency, and $1 million for repairs to the Colchester Legion Stadium in Truro affected by Hurricane Fiona. Good examples of our commitment to maintaining vibrant community sports and infrastructures. The department is well positioned to support communities, and we use various means to communicate our programs to Nova Scotians. For example, we make sure constituency offices are aware of our grant programs when applications are open and when the deadline is to submit them. We strive to be flexible and adaptable in responding to the needs of our communities, which is at the core of our mission. We're always trying to find the right balance between being consistent and being responsive to their different needs. So I'm pleased to say we've made major progress. We've updated guidelines, applications, and reporting to ensure that applicants link their project to the program's objectives. We've developed tools and hosted training sessions to ensure we're embedding risk assessment in all our programs. There's so much more to say, but I'll turn it over to Bill at this moment, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Deputy. Mr. Greenlaw.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be back here on our anniversary date, I guess. Some of you are a little different, but some of you are the same players around the table, so nice to be back. And as Deputy Huston mentioned, this is my second of one pretty tied together with going to committee. So I'm not fortunate enough to go to 3 like he had to go to. So as the Deputy Huston mentioned, I'll talk more specifically about our infrastructure grants. We support everything from rinks and recreation facilities to trails to community halls to legions, fundamentally soup to nuts. I shared in a previous committee appearance that we are in the business of building stronger communities across Nova Scotia. And healthy communities need gathering places that support people's social, emotional, and physical well-being. If there's a place in your community where people come together for a program to participate in sport or be physically active or even play cards and catch up with friends, there's a good chance that CCTH has helped with that facility meeting its mandate. We have 77 grant programs across the department that support a wide range of community organizations and projects, but I'll focus on just a few today. The Communities Facilities Improvement Program, or CFIP, as the deputy mentioned, helps not-for-profit organizations make repairs and upgrades with funding up to $50,000. This program supported 25 projects last year. For example, it funded the Maitland Bridge Community Hall Association in Annapolis County to make urgent exterior repairs to keep the facility safe and open for community use. CFIP also helps facilities become more sustainable so they can better meet environmental standards and reduce operating costs. For example, the program funded the Cranton Cross Road Community Center in Marguerite Center to install a heat pump and upgrade their electrical system. And we also help facilities become more inclusive in who they serve. Our community accessibility grants helps organizations become more accessible in 5 categories: the built environment, transportation, communications, assistive devices, and universal design. This year, the Community Accessibility funded 58 projects for a total of $1 million. The program supported the Savoy Theatre in Glace Bay to purchase hearing loops so patrons who have hearing difficulties can fully enjoy performances. Our grants have gone towards equipment such as accessible exam tables at health clinics or universal design for entrances and washrooms. We've also shown over the past year, as we dealt with everything from a pandemic to natural disasters, that our staff and our programs can be nimble and responsive to meeting community needs. After Hurricane Fiona in 2022, we quickly stood up the Community Generator Program to help community centers buy and install generators so they can serve as comfort centers during a storm or other power outages. In 2022-23, we allocated $5.8 million for 180 organizations under this program. And in this fiscal year, we funded another 66 community recipients totaling $1.9 million. That's nearly 250 generators funded in community halls, volunteer fire departments, food banks, and other centers over 2 years. In fact, the program met the demand so successfully that we aren't offering it as a specific program in 2024-25, and going forward, we will consider generator requests as part of our regular infrastructure funding. I want to briefly mention our food support as another example of how we're responding to pressing community needs. We know that food security is a growing issue in Nova Scotia, as it is in other places. Through the Community Food Access and Literacy Fund and the Local Food Security Initiatives Fund, we support everything from meal planning and nutrition to local Meals on Wheels programs and food pantries. For example, this year we funded the Bear River First Nation to provide a 5-month workshop series that helped 65 community households with food preparation and meal planning on a budget. And in Lewisburg, we're supporting the local Legion branch to offer monthly community meals, biweekly senior socials, and snacks for their youth drop-in programs. Lewisburg is more than 30 kilometers from the nearest grocery store, so these programs are meeting a real need in that community. And it's not just about filling bellies. It's also about, it's not just about filling bellies, although that is certainly important. But food is a social connector. A community meal brings teenagers, young families, and seniors together in the same room, creating stronger bonds and a sense of local pride. I want to close with a few words on how we do this work. As most of you know, I'm fortunate enough, and the deputy's fortunate enough, to have an excellent staff in the department, and specifically, because I'm here, I can say my division, including, and you probably know, my 6 regional managers, but we have 6 regional offices around the province, and they're regularly meeting with community organizations, holding town halls and info sessions, and helping local groups understand their funding options and helping them developing strong applications. Our team members actively work with partners and organizations to help them leverage our funding to build stronger, healthier communities. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that the application period, I've already spoken to one of you about this already, the our major infrastructure grants close this February 14th. And if you know projects looking for funding, hopefully they've already spoken to their local CCTH regional office or one of my program officers. But if not, I encourage them to email or pick up the phone. As you know, we're always here to help. With that, I'll conclude my remarks and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenlaw. We will now move and open the floor to questioning. This committee functions on a 20-minute per caucus questioning, and I also want to remind everyone to wait until I acknowledge you before speaking and your mic turns red. And at this point, I will turn it over to the Liberal Caucus, MLA Nicol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the presentations. I just wondered, there's many community centers and facilities now that have come forward and said that they want to help during the housing crisis by providing shelters to those experiencing homelessness, but are unable to do so without funding. So I just wondered, is the department aware of this, and are you working with Municipal Affairs and Housing to support community centers to help shelter those experiencing homelessness?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks for the question. Very timely, and it's a great question. So, yes, we are working collaboratively across departments. As you know, housing and shelters it's a complex issue. So we're able to tap into, and community groups are able to tap into resources. So, for example, starting foundationally, it's very difficult to even consider how to utilize community centers for either day shelters or whatever it might be if a roof is leaking or they're not accessible. So I'll just underline that some of our existing programs are key in terms of making sure that those facilities are operational and are able to serve the broader community. And then there are conversations that have been happening and are continuing to happen with municipal affairs as well as community services around how do we help support communities, meet communities where they're at and what their priorities are for looking for assisting with the housing and the homelessness issue in those communities. As you can appreciate, and you would know full well, even within your own constituency, different communities are going to approach things differently. And so our focus is really on how do we work with those organizations we have relationships with, leaders in the community, to help them meet the needs that they've identified to help address their fellow neighbors and citizens.
MLA Nicol.
And I guess, and in that regard, with respect, you spoke about diversity and, the certain funds that you have in CPED. So are you taking into consideration the amount of community supports, like newcomer supports, for helping the unhoused when they're trying to award grants at centers and facilities across the province?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Yes. The short answer to that is yes. And to elaborate a little further is so our division, particularly when Bill's division, our community section, work very closely with different community organizations, whether that's ISANS, provincially or here in the city, or organizations such as up in Cape Breton around. I think of the work that we did a couple years back or a year ago around bus shelters for international students that were having difficulties getting to and from class from where their housing was available. So something we're very live to. And again, kind of woven throughout our opening remarks is the need to be flexible and adaptive and responsive to what communities themselves are identifying as the key bottlenecks or barriers to meeting those services.
MLA Nicol.
And just within your presentation, you mentioned not-for-profits, and there were 4,100 applications and 77, I think you said that is received. So I just wondered, of the 41 applications, were they all successful?
We have 7. Sorry, I'll start.
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks for that question. So yeah, in that specific program, there were 141 applicants, and I believe it was 70-something that were successful. So, and we can talk about this in greater detail, but we have different kinds of funding programs with different types of criteria. Some we have independent panels, which review and provide recommendations. Others are directed through staff review and assessment. And so of those, they're typically ranked on a scoring system, and it depends on the type of program. So often has to do with maybe the complexity of the issue, the breadth of the community it's serving, or is it a target community that we know needs particular focus? And some of this goes into the assessment. It's different for different programs. There are also a process where we might deem application ineligible because they don't meet the criteria for whatever reason. But then typically of those that are eligible, we will rank those on a scoring grid, and then from high to low, we will fund based on what funding is available. If additional funding becomes available through the year, for example, another program we have wasn't fully subscribed, I would think of a good example would be the business accessibility grants. Last year, it was not fully subscribed, and enough businesses did not apply at that time. It's not the case this year, but last year wasn't, so we were able to move some of that funding into the community accessibility grant, which was able to then fund the programs that weren't previously approved for funding because we had the available funds.
MLA Nickel.
And so back to the not-for-profits, because I know there are recreational grants that are given to municipal units, but this is separate. This is just for the not-for-profits. The municipal units would apply for grants for their facilities in some other form, in some other source. I just wanted to sort of clarify that.
Deputy Minister Huston.
Yes, there are funding programs that are directed towards recreational facilities, whether that's new facilities, new improved facilities, energy efficiency. And municipalities can be a proponent and apply. It can also be an operator of that. The society, for example, that might operate on behalf of a municipal unit or another organization. So it's a little bit of both.
MLA Nickel.
Yes, and I was a member of one of those societies, so therefore I know, and I think it's by design that rinks are the first thing you say when you say we give grants to rinks. And so rinks and pools are big sinkholes, literally. And so therefore they require a lot of funding. So I just wondered if there's at some point that if the asks continue to be from the same facilities, trying to sort of keep the lights on, whether that is deemed as ineligible at some point.
Deputy Minister Huston.
I'll start, and then maybe I can hand it to Bill for just to elaborate a little further. So it is something that we look at. For example, a lot of these facilities, they're built decades ago, they're aging. And so assessments are done typically before we would invest anything major. We would, if let's say it's a major overhaul, or we would look at, is there an engineering assessment that could be done to say, look, if you're just going to repaint this 5 years, the steel girders are going to fail anyway, so let's rethink this. But, for the most part, these organizations, like you said, it's high humidity environments. They're heavily used by communities. And so often it's, what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound. I can't remember the expression. Pound of cure. It's keeping on top of the upkeep. And what we see so often, particularly with volunteer organizations, that if they aren't able to sustain that regular upkeep, it's going to cost the community and all of us a lot more in the end. So the other part, and we can talk a little bit about this too, is around energy efficiency. So some of this is making ends meet, and it's also environmentally responsible. Are there ways that we can upgrade the systems? And maybe, Bill, you can talk a little bit about some of the electrification of some of these community grants. There's ways that we can make it's a win-win-win across the board, but communities otherwise would just probably need to pay for the lowest common denominator because they're fundraising, and they might just install the same oil heater or fix it versus is there a chance to upgrade to heat pumps?
Mr. Greenlaw.
Yeah, let me just begin by saying that community recreational facilities are emotional assets to communities. And so... Huh? I'm not. Anyway, I'm decommissioning recreation facilities is a very challenging thing to do across the country. People have grown up going to a certain asset, they love it. And so I don't know about you, but I've been in I have children who did sports and around the province, and one was fortunate enough to be a hockey player. And I can say that some of the rural rinks in Nova Scotia have got to be the best kept facilities I've ever seen. You could literally eat off the floor. There's pride from community, all the community volunteers to make sure that that facility stays up. So while our assets might be aging, some of them are like there's a few outliers that are not kept up well, but majority of them there's a sense of community pride. So we provide the supports that help do those, like with the rink revitalization program, big run. If you look at how the grants went over the last couple of years. It's the time for the chillers and the ice plants to be recycled or renewed. So a lot of investment went into those sorts of assets. A lot of roofs got invested in, right? So with that fund. And the other kind of cool, I mean, for me, is the electrification of the Zambonis. I don't know if you've seen the electrification of Zambonis around, but that has also been things that we've invested in to help ensure our green future and that we're not wearing masks while the Zamboni goes around cleaning the ice. So I think, you know, it's a bit of both, but, you know, the reality is recreation facilities are lost leaders in community. So yes, they're going to cost us money, and they are a public good, but we also know that they're vital community well-being, sustainability, and proud that we're able to support them in the way that we do.
Deputy Minister Huston, you had something else to add?
Just as a follow-up, while Bill was talking, it allowed me to kind of go through my binder here and find some facts that I thought it would be useful to share, just so folks understand the rink revitalization program. It's $1 million a year fund. Groups are eligible to receive up to 1/3 of the total cost of the project to a maximum of $150,000. Most projects are much smaller than that. The funding that goes out the door, I'd say between $20,000 and $50,000. We've funded over 3 years. We've funded 65 rink projects, and 32 in 2021, 22 in 2022, and 11 in 2023, which speaks to, I think, you know, the need that was present, but also sort of folks are kind of seeing, okay, we've made some investments, now let's maybe focus in some other areas of community. But it certainly has been a popular program.
MLA Kerr?
Thank you very much. The past government, I think in 2017, tabled legislation to get to those targets for accessibility in 2030. And I'm just wondering if the department is asking for increased budgets or supports to help meet those targets within our facilities.
Deputy Minister Huston.
That's a great question. I think, you know, when you think of, I mean, I remember thinking of the year 2025, and it was just, that seemed like the distant future. But 2023 is sooner than we think. But I'm pleased to say that a lot of different organizations are really stepping up. And so, as I mentioned previously, I think the Business Accessibility Fund, I think this is the first year will be fully subscribed. And I think businesses were kind of slow to realize that, and we've upped also our communication on the issue in terms of working with other departments that are working with businesses, but also directly to business sector within the tourism, because tourism is now within the department. We have a closer reach there. So around the funding piece, I think the funding has been adequate to date. I will say that we have been able to, as I was speaking with MLA, in response to MLA Nichols' question, where we've seen projects that are great projects, but we just don't have enough funds, we have been able to redirect funding and in some cases get additional appropriations because if there's a good project and communities are ready to get it done and we're able to provide a portion of that and they have the other matching funds, then we want to be a part of that. So we've been looking to prioritize that. I don't see us in going forward in this fiscal, I don't see us making an increase in that budget line. But I do think that could be on the horizon, and it's something that we're looking closely at because I think as we get closer to 2030, I think we're going to have a lot of organizations and businesses that are going to be looking to make sure they get it done.
MLA Kerr.
Thank you for that response. Switching gears, the Recreation Facility Development Grant, I work with a lot of groups, as a lot of MLAs do. These groups are aware of that grant. They're aware of CFIP. They're aware of the RDA grants. But I do have a number of facilities and groups that are barely making the mark. So they've got, a volunteer group that is above capacity. They're they've got committees looking at funding and media relations. They've gone above and beyond what most groups would be expected to do. But, every year is a gamble on whether they can keep that facility open. I'm curious about the funding formula of those three programs directed at facilities. And maybe the second part of that question could be, are we missing the mark on any of that funding formula? Is there something we should be looking at or adding to that formula? Thank you.
Deputy Minister Huston.
So I'll start with just an overall response, and then I think Bill knows a lot of these programs certainly better than I, and his staff would know it even better. So there are different programs, as you speak to. Some are focused on that are around facilities development, others around improvement. So facilities development would be like, we want to add on a wing that's going to include an open access weight room for community onto a community hall. Improvement might be around we need to upgrade the electrical so that we can provide Wi-Fi. And then we have other ones that are around, like the community accessibility, so providing some of those grants. I will say that, and I hear those concerns, we do hear those concerns, and luckily I think we have staff that work very closely with community organizations. So we try to never, there's no closed door when it comes to CCTH. So it may be unsuccessful in a particular funding program, but we want to work with those organizations and groups to understand maybe there's another way that we could approach this. Maybe it's a different kind of investment. It could be a one-time project fund where we look at, maybe it doesn't fit into any of these boxes, but it has a lot of merit, and we want to explore how do we just make this happen a different way. So I would encourage you and the different groups to work with our department, and if it's good, if it serves the community and it's a good idea, then there's ways we can try to make that happen.
MLA Kerr. Oh, sorry. Mr. Greenlaw, did you have things to add?
Well, that was a great answer, Deputy. Yeah, thank you. It's my contract renewal time, so I'll pass around the contract. We hear that finding the matching funding for our grant programs is a challenge, and we are adjusting the ratio of what we will, like going from 1/3 that we would support to 2/3 of the project, where the community group has to come up with 1/3, right? So not putting the burden on communities, because selling cookies and muffins and things at the front door of the facility, you got to sell a lot of cookies to raise 50 grand or 40 grand. So we're aware of that, and we're trying to do that. But, provincially, we support physical activity, and we promote physical activity and community well-being, et cetera. And so there's only so much the province can do in supporting facilities. The community has to think about operating dollars. So, like, if us going into operating municipal facilities or funding operating grants for municipal facilities is just really it's not realistic, and that needs to be the responsibility of the municipality.
MLA Kerr with 242.
Okay, so good segue. I've got a particular group, the Annapolis Pool group. They've got great capacity on operations. They've gone from hiring 3 to 11 lifeguards and staff. They train other staff from Digby and beyond. They've built a committee, as I mentioned before, on media relations, on fundraising. It would take, every day $1,000 bean breakfast to make up that gap. They have a pool liner that's broken. Quotes are up to $500,000 to fix that liner. Otherwise, they've got everything sorted. They've hit their 2030 accessibility targets already. So, if that group can't make it work, I don't know what group could. I'm going to table their ask. And I also want to mention your regional office in Kentville has been outstanding. So the staff there we've met with, the staff in Kentville has done a great job. There's nothing more they can do at their level. So that's why I'm bringing it to committee and ask, what can we do for this group that's done everything above and beyond, but isn't able to open this year and serve those hundreds of people in the area. Thank you.
Deputy Minister Houston.
As a former lifeguard, a summer job, I certainly am interested in pools. I think, like rinks, they serve an important role in the community. And this project in particular, it is a good project. They have been working very directly with our department, and we are looking at ways to make this happen. So stay tuned on that. Thank you for tabling it, and I would just encourage them to keep the conversation going with our staff.
MLA Kerr with 1 minute.
Appreciate a former lifeguard, and as a former lifeguard, I can, and started at that pool in my teenage years. It was a way of getting out of doing farm work on the farm, so, yeah, but I really enjoyed it. And it does serve a number of people outside of our town as well. Maybe I'll switch gears if I have time, just around, I think last week in public accounts, the DM, you mentioned the event strategy at CCTH. I'd like to know, is it at the beginning, the middle, or the end stage of that strategy?
Deputy Minister Houston, 30 seconds.
It is a strategy. I believe that came in a few years back. It's an evergreen strategy, so we continue to follow that strategy in terms of kind of our key focus areas, So there's no, I don't foresee us, like we're not having conversations around, need to do a new one or update it.
Perfect timing. I will now turn it over to the NDP Caucus, beginning with MLA Burrell.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh, well, everybody's thinking about weather and storms. So coming back to the generator program, I understood your explanation that the program was so kind of thorough and it's post-Fiona shot that really you can deal with this now by expanding the criteria of other programs, discontinuing the program itself. But can you give us some sense, does that mean that after 1 year the need is actually met? Or is there, do you have some sense of there being an unmet need that you could speak to?
Deputy Minister Houston.
No, it's a good question, and I don't want to leave the impression that we are closing the door on any kind of discussions or applications around generator programs for community centers or warming centers. I think the point was that, the number that we saw, 180 in the first year, we initially had started that fund at, I believe it was 2 million, and then we saw that the need was so great, and we had contemplated, okay, so we're going to have this program for a number of years, but there was space in the budget and direction to provide additional funding. So we were able to provide, I think it was 5.8, which was able to address those needs immediately. Last year, we saw a number of applications come in, but it was significantly reduced, about half of that, I think, or so. So, and we were able to prioritize and fund all of those. So, from what we're hearing from our staff that are on the ground working with the organizations, the feeling is that the majority of those needs have been met. That said, that we remain always open. We have other funding programs like our infrastructure facilities funds, and we do want to hear from organizations that that see it as a priority. And there are a lot of places that can serve that need and are important, like on days like today or over the weekend. But we also know that once you have some of these things in place, and as we look at energy efficiency, we don't want just groups to come back every year and just upgrade and get the nicest, newest generator. This needs to be really based on need. And so that's why we're taking this approach where we're waiting to see what comes in this year. But we feel like the need has been met significantly.
MLA Burrell.
Does that mean that the criteria for the expanded program, wherever it goes to live now after the discontinuation of the community generators program, are substantially the same as they were in the program itself? Or is there an expansion or a contraction?
Deputy Minister Houston.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry. Yeah.
MLA Burrell.
Well, with the program discontinued, but the need being addressed by expanding to include that in other programs, are the criteria in the programs where it is now being located substantially unchanged from the criteria that existed with the original program?
Deputy Minister Houston.
Yeah, no, I understand that question now. So, no, the criteria, for example, under the Communities Improvement Program, where folks are able to apply for energy upgrades and/or energy efficiency work, that remains. So it would fall within that, and I don't see that being a limiting factor, if that's the sort of the question. Yeah.
MLA Burrell, or Mr. Greenlaw?
Yeah, the remaining infrastructure programs will address that, but they will be prioritized. So I believe that we've addressed most of the comfort centers have received generators that were designated by municipalities. So one of the unintended consequences, you do a generator program and everybody wants to be a comfort center to get the generator. So I learned that it was quickly that the municipality had to designate it. So I think we have that covered. A lot of the community infrastructure was quite successful in getting generator program. So I just want to be, if there is a facility out there that has like an emergency need, like we prioritize the emergency needs, and then if we get to generators, we will. So I just don't want to think that it's going to be an easy access to a generator. It'll be scored and based upon need. But we think, and the other thing that we through Department of Community Services, they gave us funding, and we dealt with all of the shelters. So the 14 shelters all got generators as well through the last year. So.
Deputy Minister Huston?
Just 2 points. One. Sorry, thank you. Just 2 points. One, I also want to, you mentioned municipalities. We've been working closely with Mi'kmaq communities as well. So those needs have been met. And I want to, the message to everybody is if there is an organization that is needing a generator for the purposes the bill outlined and is a priority, by all means, don't hesitate to have them contact us, and we will work with them directly to make sure that those needs can be met.
MLA Burrell?
So could it be possible then that there could be organizations that may have been deemed ineligible under the old program that, depending on circumstances, may be eligible now?
Deputy Minister Huston?
That's probably unlikely. The generator program cast a pretty wide net, and given the aftermath of Fiona, and we saw how great the need was and the need for distributed generator systems across the regions, we kept, that was a pretty big net. So I don't see that groups that weren't eligible. Again, some of this, a great example of what would be ineligible is a for-profit business that is not eligible. And so those were quickly deemed as ineligible because we wanted to focus on those nonprofits.
MLA Burrell?
Well, thanks. And I wanted to ask a little about the facilities improvement grants. It used to be, is it still the case, that community places of worship were not within the eligibility? Is that still the case?
Mr. Greenlaw?
Technicality here, MLA Burrell, is so we would not support the sanctuary, but if the church or the faith facility, as I guess I'll be more generic, had a recreation hall in the basement or a community kitchen, and the roof needed repairs, they would be eligible to apply. But if it was just as a faith-based experience and not a community asset, would not be eligible, right? And we would not support repairs to the church, or the example I would be is the church, like the altar or the pews. Those would be ineligible, but anything that's downstairs or off to the side.
MLA Burrell?
So this has been the case for a long time, but I wonder if the department's giving any thought to the changing relevance of this rule, given the way that worship spaces are used in particularly rural communities more lately. For example, Mr. Greenlaw, you spoke about pews. Pews are rarer than they used to be. That's because sanctuary spaces are now used more commonly as community gathering spaces. Very, very commonly, funeral community gathering spaces. So I wonder if that criteria is something that could stand to be looked at from that point of view.
Deputy Minister Huston?
Well, the short answer would be yeah, that's something that we can take back to have a look at and re-examine. We do try to focus again on meeting community needs. So, there are some, for example, some churches that are being reimagined that, might be faith-based on Sunday, but are utilized for concerts on other days. And so there are some angles there, but again, a part of that is limited resources and trying to be able to focus on where some of that need is great. And if you have a congregation, I know some congregations or faith-based organizations are volunteer and they're struggling to meet, but there is the ability for those organizations to seek other sources of funding, Heritage Canada, for example, or others. So, but it is something that we can certainly look at.
Mr. Greenlaw.
Yeah, so I would encourage community to talk to our regional managers and explain how the facility is being used, because if all the chairs are being removed and it's a community gathering space, it would be eligible. It just depends on the description and how the facility is actually used. So it's not a hard yes and a hard no. There needs to be a discussion, as the deputy said in one of his remarks, is that we're not here to say no, we're here to figure out how to help you. And so we need to know the nuances and the subtlety of how that asset or facility is being used, the faith-based facility, and then we can have a discussion. But if it is purely a faith-based facility, it would not be eligible.
MLA Burrell.
I just would like to suggest about this, if it's being looked at in the department, that the smaller the community, the more this consideration is relevant. So that very rural communities quite commonly have no public gathering area other than one place of worship. And there are many communities that used to have a community hall and a legion and a place which now only have a church. And we see smaller places of worship being remodeled for those purposes. And I think it would be helpful for that to be, I think, acknowledged in the criteria going forward. Great, thank you.
MLA LaChance.
Great, thank you. And Deputy, I hope this is not inappropriate, but I enjoyed seeing you contribute to the culture of our province, most recently in a concert at St. Andrews. So that was a great concert. So I wanted to ask about spending on food. You mentioned the Access and Literacy Fund for food, I think, and the local foods program. And, I think, there's a couple of, priorities for Nova Scotians in there, right? So one is food security and access to food, which is only growing, as we know. And the other is the emphasis on local foods and growing local consumption. So I have sort of a series of questions around this. What was the total spent on food security, I might call it, or you might call it a different bucket, but food security from the department in past years? And is it all emphasizing local foods, or is some of it more broad than that?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the compliment as well. So in terms of, we have two programs that we run through CCTH, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we do with other departments as well. We have a Community Food Access Literacy Fund and then the Food Security Initiatives Fund. So the Community Food Security Initiatives program, so this is like supporting things like Meals on Wheels, food pantries, hamper programs. That's $1 million a year. And the program also includes an annual investment in the farmers markets of Nova Scotia Cooperative Nourishing Coupon Program. So that's an example where lower income families can access coupons to use at farmers markets with no strings attached. And the data coming out of that is pretty incredible in terms of how they're directing those resources towards accessing local food. Then we have the Community Food Access and Literacy Fund, which is about $200,000 a year. And that's something that we do in collaboration with the Department of Health and Wellness, where those are things like supporting community gardens, helping Nova Scotians. Bill gave a good example earlier around how to do meal planning, nutritious meals on a budget. We also work very closely with the library system. And so whether it's resources there in terms of, books on gardening or how to grow local foods, to actually classes and programs that they run at libraries. We've looked at funding those and supporting those that are coming directly from community interest. So we do work with Department of Agriculture, for example, on the farmers market piece, and they're doing a whole bunch of work around buying local and local foods, which we are supporting as much as possible. I can give you a sense of in 2021-22, we funded 27 projects, 22-23, 21 projects, and 23-24, 12 projects. Another one that would be of interest would be the mobile food market, which started as a pilot, which was bringing food to areas that would be considered a food desert. So, not easy access, whether it's through driving or public transportation, to supermarkets, and bringing local foods to community, and that's proven so successful that's turned into a permanent, no longer a mobile food market, but a permanent food market.
Emily Lachance.
I was interested to hear the number of projects funded over the past few years. So there was actually quite a decrease in this past year. Can you talk a bit about why there was a decrease in the total number of projects?
Deputy Minister Huston.
I don't know if we know that offhand. That's something we can get to you, but I would, it may be, often it's not because there isn't a need or an interest. It may just be the scale of some of those projects that are coming forward. I think as, you'll notice that that's kind of happened through time. As in this past year, I think as organizations are becoming more organized and working together collaboratively, we've seen a number of groups team up and put in sort of a joint application for a more substantive project. And based on our criteria, we think that has the most impact. And so that is what I would suspect, but I will follow up and find and give you, why don't we do this? I'll provide a description of what those projects are for the last year so you get a sense of what those 12 are.
Emily Lachance.
And I want to go back to the Nourishing Coupon program. So, you mentioned the data is incredible coming out of that, and I would concur everything that I've seen about the program and its evaluation outcomes has been very positive. Now, the total amount available for Nova Scotia families in this past year decreased. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what happened and why the province didn't fill that gap.
Deputy Minister Huston.
Yep, that's an issue we know well, and I will turn it to Bill for some of the detail there. But it's a little bit of semantics around money that was provided in what fiscal years. So it was seen as a decrease. It actually wasn't a decrease. We maintained the same level of funding. But maybe, Bill, you want to speak to that in a little more detail?
No, that's
Mr. Greenlaw.
No, that's exactly what happened. So when the farmers market came in and asked for a funding increase, we listened to the executive director, and we had opportunities at end-of-year funding to top up and get them to the 422.4 that they requested. So the farmers market budgets, I believe, on a calendar year, and we budget on a fiscal year. So our March funding that was interpreted as an increase for the summer, but it was like April 1st to March 31st, and so our funding, and from the way that we would do accounting, has remained the same. I appreciate the misunderstanding.
Deputy Minister Huston.
And if I could just say is, like, we are continuing to have conversations with a variety of organizations, including our partners at Health and Wellness, DCS, Agriculture. We see this as a successful pilot, and we're learning a lot. And so conversations continue around how we can make additional investments, whether it's through this program or others. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that we don't see the value in this. We absolutely do, and we're looking at ways that we can expand or bring lessons learned to other areas of the province.
Emily Lachance with 3 minutes, just under.
Thank you. So I think maybe I'll ask a couple more questions in this area. So in terms of the Nourishing Food Coupon program, so was the number of Nova Scotians helped, or Nova Scotian households helped the same year over the past couple of years?
Deputy Minister Huston.
I don't have access to that information in my binder of information here right now, but that is something that we could give you a summary of the results to see. What I think is interesting is, if I could just take a bit of time, is one of the things that's, I think, interesting about this program is providing the coupons that could be used in any way at these food markets. And maybe someone who might be a critic of this idea might say, well, then you could spend it on, I don't know, like mittens or candles or soap. But what we really saw was that folks did prioritize access to good local food to feed their families. And I think a lesson learned for us is the more that we can give people opportunity and good information, they will make good decisions for their families. We know that. And it's good to see how that program played that out.
Emily LaChance.
And I was actually surprised, too, to hear about funding for Meals on Wheels, just because I assumed that it might come through another department, so whether that would be seniors or DCS. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about like that role, and because I think of Meals on Wheels as a very specific service provider, providing a specific service that fills a real food insecurity gap, right? And so sort of how did it come to be funded through your department as opposed to other departments?
Deputy Minister Huston, just under a minute.
I don't know the specifics on the intricacies of exactly how, but I will tell you that we work very closely with our fellow departments of community services, seniors. And so oftentimes we will get I'll get a call from my deputy colleague at another department, and we want to figure out how to get, this is a good project, how do we make this happen? Often communities, culture, tourism, and heritage is the way to get it done because we have such direct contacts in community. We have a lot of regional staff that work with these organizations, that work with the volunteers that are maybe on Meals on Wheels, but they're also very active in other boards. So our staff are often very closely tied into what's happening on the ground, and we have 77 different funding programs. And for example, in these, we have a vehicle through which we can flow funding if it's seen as a priority. And so in this case, I know it's something that we were able to stand up very quickly and have that reporting mechanism and flow the funds and get that moving quickly.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. We're just going to, the time for the NDP question has lapsed, so I'm going to turn it over to the PC Caucus with MLA Barkos.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if you could please provide details about the trail expansion grant and its importance to the development and expansion of recreational trails in the province.
Deputy Minister Huston.
We're seeing which of us wants to really answer this one. So, thanks for the question. It's something. It's a great one. Actually, we're just kind of like, who wants to take this one? So we have two different. Just to be clear, we have two different funding programs. So we have a trail expansion program, which is around just under $1 million a year, and this one we've had for quite a little while. We can provide up to a third of the total cost to a maximum of $150,000, which funds need to be matched by either municipal, federal, or community, volunteer, or private. This past fiscal or this current fiscal, we were able to support up to 16 projects. And so, an expansion might be, we're looking to increase the distance of a trail, or there's some trail that exists, but it currently isn't accessible. So are there ways that we can expand that to tap into a parking lot so more people can use the trail? Something that we've been hearing about for a number of years from different trail organizations was, it's great to have this fund to help us build trails because one of our priorities is active living. But once you build it, the challenge, as we've kind of referenced with community groups, is, well, how do you keep this up? People are willing to put in the time and energy, but how do you, when there's a big flood and a washout, how do you get the gravel to fill it in, bring in a front-end loader and get that work done? So we have a trail operational funding program as well that has been a pilot where it's a 3-year funding program. So groups can apply for funding in year 1, and they'll submit their annual report so we can see kind of the work that's happening. And then in year 3, which is year coming up, we're going to kind of do an assessment of that program and see, is it achieving the results we want to achieve? Is the need greater or is it less? And we were in the news recently following Fiona and some of the major floods. There's a lot of trails were washed out, so we were able to kind of step in and figure out how to get things done. Because as I said, it's one thing to someone to go out with a shovel and do minor repair, but it's a whole other when you've got sections and bridges that are washed out that need major repair.
MLA Barkos.
Thank you. That's something my community suffered from in regards to the flood, as Mr. Greenlaw Sorry, I call you so often sometimes. I know that, I'm just going to say it because it's fair to say the previous government really invested in our communities. For example, freezing on the museum funding and whatnot. So these are my thoughts, but I'd like to hear from you. Why does the CCTH budget tend to increase significantly, each year compared to the original budget? And how does the department manage these additional funds?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thank you for that question. So, yeah, we work very closely, as I mentioned. We have all these different funding programs, and we work very closely with community organizations. And so, unfortunately, the funding that we have, say, to start a year isn't able to cover all the needs that come in from community. So we essentially keep sort of running lists, whether they're within a program or we have ideas that have come up that, might be a great idea but don't fit naturally into a funding program. And if additional funds become available through the budget cycle, then we are able to sort of raise things up, and our minister can bring things forward to colleagues and say, look, we've got some great projects here that should funds become available, we'd like to invest in this community infrastructure or these different community programs. So they follow, because similar to MLA LaChance's question around, say, for example, Meals on Wheels, we do have the funding programs, they fall within those various funding programs. And we do have reporting structures that we require to report on. So we make sure that those investments are sustainable and are accountable to the taxpayers.
MLA Barkos.
I'm wondering if you could provide some details on the Blue Route initiatives, its expected impact on tourism and community connectivity in Nova Scotia. I'm a big fan of this.
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks for that question. So the Blue Route, for those that don't know, is essentially a cycling initiative that really is being led by the Department of Public Works through their transportation division. And it's twofold. It's looking at how do we connect trails that are used by community for cycling to road systems in terms of, if anyone, for example, has tried to bike out to Lawrencetown Beach, you would know that the shoulders on that road used to be very narrow. And through some upgrades that happened this past summer, able to expand the width of the road to create safe areas for people to bike out that way that can connect into things like the rails to trails. And so the idea is to have a comprehensive system that folks can utilize for biking, whether that's for tourist opportunities. And it's great to have the Division of Tourism with us now, because they're looking at ways to emphasize that through promotional materials, to folks being able to use the Blue Route for daily commutes, not just here in the city, but in other areas across Nova Scotia. Access to rails to trails puts you onto a road that can bring you right to your place of work or wherever you're going. So as of fall 2023, there's approximately 500 kilometers of Blue Route that's open. So that's about, as I mentioned, that's 175 kilometers on road, and the remainder is on trail. So that work continues, though, and the idea is to get Nova Scotia as blue as possible. And that's certainly what we're seeing from a lot of tourists that we're trying to attract, particularly in shoulder seasons and off-season, is they want authentic, active experiences in Nova Scotia. And that's certainly an area where we see, whether it's the Grand Fondos that happen Guysborough or down on the Acadian shore, it's a huge opportunity for us, but it's got to be accessible and it has to be safe, and that's what a part of these road upgrades are all about.
MLA Barkos.
Agreed, it is very important. I know that the 333 from Tantallon is getting paved shoulders this summer, but I also have the Blue Route, which is the Aspatogan, that sees a lot of bicyclists throughout the year, and the shoulders have yet to be paved, but we're on it. So what programs and initiatives in the department using to upgrade aging infrastructures in rural communities? Because there's a lot of us here that are rural MLAs, and I know we've talked about it off and on, but I'd like to just narrow it down to a statement by you, either of you.
Mr. Greenlaw.
To relieve the deputy and answer this one? So, I mean, we do have we've talked about the infrastructure programs, and that is our main tool to address the aging facilities. So we have the Community Facility Improvement Program, which I mentioned, the Rink Revitalization Fund, the Recreation Facility Development Fund. We have both the Community and Business Accessibility Fund that people are using to upgrade both businesses and public facilities. We have the Legion Capital Assistance Program, which we haven't mentioned yet today, and it goes on. And so we also, depending on the need and the emergency related to those aging facilities, we have been successful in the past in getting additional appropriations to address some of the more urgent needs to help communities with those significant infrastructure pressures.
Emily Barkos.
Perfect, thank you. And yes, the Legion, three of my Legions managed to apply for that and were successful. I'm going to pass it on to MLA Harrison.
MLA
you.
Harrison.
Madam Chair, I'm one of the rural MLAs, and in certain communities, you see a lot of things going. Banks are going, churches are going. The communities, a lot of them do not have good facilities in which to meet. And I'm a great proponent in that, because if the communities don't have a place to gather for a number of things, they just continue to decline and die. I just want to ask a few questions on the facilities. When you get applications in, I'm not sure how many applications you get in, I might have missed that. How many do come in the round of a year? Do you have any idea?
Deputy Minister Huston.
There isn't a simple answer to that because different programs have different, but we would get in hundreds through the year across the various programs.
Community facilities.
Well, I think we received 141 last, is that the one? Yeah, we received about 140 last year, and about 75 of which were successful.
And I'm assuming,
MLA Harrison.
sorry, Madam Chair. When you get those applications, I assume they're in written form. What happens when you receive them, as far as connecting with the community, meeting with people, going to the facility? Do you do that?
Deputy Minister Huston.
That is a great question. So I'll give you a sort of a general example is that, or just an overall statement is that we want communities to have the most successful application they possibly can. So this isn't a process of, you get something in and you're like, oh, they forgot to cross their T, or they didn't fill this form out, so often what we encourage is, even before folks make a written application or apply, we want, for example, you as an MLA to tell them, pick up the phone, call Mr. Greenlaw or the regional manager in that area, and we will work with them to help them figure out what is the best program to which they should apply. And we will then work with them on, okay, look, here's your program. I understand what you're trying to achieve, but really, for you to be successful, here's some other things you need to think about. You need to work on engaging the broader, I'm just saying as an example. And then we'll look even at drafts of applications to say, look, I think there's ways that you need to provide us with more information because we can't make a decision based on what you've provided. So we will work hand in hand with those organizers and folks. And the other thing, too, is that we try to be very honest. There's nothing worse, I think, than having a group with limited time and capacity spend a lot of time and energy, and, someone's afraid to say no for a reason, and then, they get led on. We want to be very clear as much as we can up front to say, look, I know there's an interest, but here's why this isn't probably going to work. Here's something else you might want to consider. So we try to work very closely so that there aren't any surprises for anybody. And so particularly we want to make sure that we're working with local MLAs. You know your communities best. And we want to make sure that you're helping them connect to us, because probably the hardest, the most difficult project is we get something at the 11th hour, the day before something closes, and we've never heard of it. Staff have never seen the application. And it's a very difficult conversation to say, okay, well, we understand what you're trying to do, but you're not going to make it this time. Let's talk about how you can be successful in the next round.
Emily Harrison.
I'm glad to hear that, because it means a lot to community groups who are applying for this to be able to verbalize what the need is and for you folks to actually see the facility. And really important for you to let them know why they didn't reach the criteria. Because sometimes the word gets out, I'm sorry, but they don't really know the reason why. So that would be extremely important, and I'm glad you're thinking the way you are in that respect. Sure.
Deputy Minister Huston.
I'll make a couple comments on that last piece. Is that particularly for some projects that are complex or major projects, these things don't happen overnight. It may require more detailed analysis through an engineering assessment. We might need to get. We can provide levels of funding to help community groups, get class A or B or D, whatever those class drawings that help us understand, is this a feasible project? So sometimes these conversations might happen over months or years to get to where a project needs to be successful. We might need to be collaborating and working with federal partners and municipal partners to share funding resources. So it's something that we really encourage groups to talk as early as possible. You're also dealing with staff that do this for a living and have seen projects and what it takes to be successful and can provide good direction and insight. I'll also take this opportunity. I didn't mention it in my opening remarks, but there's a couple of resources that we will make sure that you have access to, one immediately and one once it comes out. One is we have a program guide, which is available on our website, but we can send it to all committee members following this, that describes all of CCTH's funding programs, what it's about, who's eligible, who to contact. We are also going to be able to release, I am hoping by the end of this month, if not the end of this month, early in the next month, a grant finder tool that we will have on our website. So this, and unlike the program guide, which is a PDF, you've got to go through all the pages, or this will be a searchable grant finder where you'll be able to kind of through a drop-down menu of multiple choice questions, it will say, what are you looking to do? Host an event, fix a facility, kind of very plain language. You can tap on and say, are you a nonprofit? Are you a business? And it will help guide you down to what grant might be the best fit. It will also, if you go through and you realize everything's like a no or maybe not, it won't close the door on you. It will say, you might want to talk to one of our staff, and it will give you a staff person to call or talk to, because we certainly don't want groups to get discouraged. Like, if anybody's ever been on, trying to navigate your credit card or Air Canada and you go through this circular thing and you can't talk to anybody, that's not what we want. So that will be, once we make that available, we'll be meeting with or desired to share with all caucuses, because it's really critical that MLAs know about this grant finder tool and you can share it with your constituents.
Mr. Greenlaw, I will make a comment that's all coming back to me our year ago committee when we were talking about that. So that's exciting. Mr. Greenlaw.
Yeah, I just, very rarely is there a no. So it's either you're ineligible or we don't have sufficient funds. So our grant programs are extremely competitive, and they're scored. They're either done by a peer review panel or external assessment committee. So it's done as fairly and objectively as we can. I would say that there's a direct positive correlation for those that engage the staff on their application and their success. Can't help people that you don't know that are applying. So I would encourage people to use the resources that we have. But there is it is extremely competitive, and if, again, as the deputy mentioned earlier, if we have some opportunities at certain times of the year to fund those insufficient funds, funded when they get that letter, we try to support them as well. But we deal within our budget envelope to begin with, and then we see how the rest of the budgets are evolving during the year. So. And I guess, too, from my experience, is that some groups are very persistent, and they can be close, and then they apply the next year and they get it. So, don't give up, because eventually we get to you. So that's, I think that's.
MLA Harrison.
Just a comment before I hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Taggart. It's good to know that these programs are in caring hands. Thank you.
MLA Taggart with 235.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I have to reiterate what MLA Harrison said there. I can't say enough about what your folks' department has done for our rural communities and the way you work to make things work. I want to make a comment here, really. Most of my questions have been answered, but I want to go back to the generator program and really how valuable that was. And I think when MLA Burrow was asking, and I was thinking, because during Fiona, almost everybody in Colchester North was out of power from 10 to 14 days, it was on their mind. So I expect that I don't have I'm pretty sure I don't have a fire brigade in Colchester North that didn't take advantage of that. And additionally, if there's one good thing come out of that whole Fiona was it spurred other community organizations to make sure that they were prepared next time to, like community halls, so they could set up comfort centers and help their fellow residents. So that was an awesome program. I think you pretty much answered this question, but quickly, how do you ensure fair and equitable distribution of funding considering the varying needs of communities?
Deputy Minister Huston with a minute left.
Your voice changed there. I didn't look up and didn't realize the change. Well, I think, in terms of the guidelines, is folks are eligible under that program. They're eligible to receive up to 100% of the cost, but to a max of $50,000. But it's important to note that, like, the program isn't out there just so people can get the biggest, best generator. They have to, get a formal assessment done about what the need is for that facility, what's required to operate that facility, submit that paperwork, and then they can access up to that amount. We also have to see that it was installed. So to make sure, and then again, it's also ranked on sort of complexity and need. So for example, if in an area there are a number of facilities that are warming centers that already have generators in place, we might not have prioritized a generator right next door if there are other areas that have none. And so that is also a big part of the analysis that went into it. But like you said, I think a number of groups realized that not every location needs to be a formal warming center for it to serve a purpose in the community. So our guidelines around that was you did not have to be a warming center, but you did have to demonstrate that you were serving a community need and that you had the ability to serve the broader public.
Order, perfect timing. We will now move into the second round of questioning, and with the time today, we'll allocate 10 minutes per caucus, beginning with the Liberal Caucus, MLA Kerr.
Thank you. Has the department made a funding ask for an increase on the infrastructure programs for this year going into a budget?
Deputy Minister Huston.
The short answer to that is no. We have not asked for an increase. We've just asked for our budget to maintain.
MLA Kerr.
And I don't know if it was answered previously, I don't think in detail, but I'm looking at the criteria of those programs and, maybe it's not consistent across all three, but is there more weight given on a heavier population for a program than maybe a rural setting?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Yeah, I don't have the criteria obviously at hand. I think that might be one of the considerations, but is sort of, I'm not sure how the ranking goes down, but absolutely an aspect of it would be community need. So whatever that might look like. It's not necessarily based on density, it would be based on need, and that can vary depending on where you are. Distance to travel is another good example of, how far it might be a very rural community with less population, but maybe the need is greater because they can't access any active transportation to get in where they need access to facilities there. So.
Mr. Greenlaw.
I sort of went there with the government's question. So the theme is that if you look at our criteria, so the program criteria is pretty clear in our funding applications, and that's how we score it. So it's pretty much equal through it. So density or ruralness or population doesn't really have a major factor. It's how the facility is used. So is it a lot of community groups? Does it have equitable and fair access to the facility, or questions that we would look like? So we look at the mandate of the organization, if you will. What's the purpose and mandate of it? How the facility supports community. the project rationale. So what is the proponent saying? Why do they want the funding, and how are they going to go about doing it? The project work and the budget, does it make sense? Like if it's like way out of whack, we have a lot of experience at looking at budgets now with infrastructure. We have a good sense. So we would normally go back to the group and say, hey, you might want to go back and get do you actually have an estimate of this one? Or did you get an estimate from a contractor about what it would cost you this work? Because this looks a little bit low. So the worst thing you can do is underfund somebody in this market, because it's really hard to get back in. Make sure that they're funded correctly. Like, what are the community outcomes? So what are the intended outcomes and benefits of that facility or that asset that we're investing in? And then we also look at the environmental impact as well of the improvements.
Emily Kerr.
Does the department help these, mostly predominantly volunteer groups, measure those outcomes? So, with usage and the data behind the usage or the environmental impact, would the department have the capacity or the ability to help these groups collect that kind of data, or is that data required?
Mr. Greenlaw.
I like to talk without the light on, but there's two ways. The discussion. My regional teams live in communities, so they know exactly how the facilities used, et cetera. So we have really on-the-ground intel about the purpose and mandate of the facilities, and generally it's very positive. But if we required specific details, like you've said, we have funding programs that we would fund them to do a review or a study of the usage of the facility through one of our planning and assistance program.
Emily Kerr.
My understanding for those programs is not-for-profits are lumped in with municipal units on the applications. Is that true?
Mr. Greenlaw.
That's correct, yeah.
Emily Kerr.
And given that, is there a benefit of separating those two groups when they apply for that same funding?
Mr. Greenlaw.
I don't think so. I mean, that's a good question. I haven't seen, I don't know if your question is going like there's been a predominance of support for municipal applications opposed to, no, okay. All right. Okay, I don't trust, I was a lifeguard, so I want to get my aquatic credentials out there too. Football. I don't think there's a benefit in doing it right now. I haven't seen a weighting go either way, and I think if we saw a predominance of municipal units being successful in the grant program, we would probably have a hard look at it. A lot of facilities, particularly outside of Metro, are community-run and owned, not necessarily by the municipality.
Emily Kerr.
No, it was raised by certain not-for-profits that I work with, and I said I would ask at the next chance I had, so that's basically the background. Where I am going with it is, the difference between rural facilities and maybe HRM facilities. I know rurally, the feeling would be often these pools or these rinks are the sole facility or the cornerstone of the community, and I would argue when I lived in HRM and otherwise there may be more options that way of, whether it be at St. Mary's or Dell kind of thing, but I'm sorry.
Municipal taxes at work.
Deputy Minister Huston.
It is something that we look at, certainly working with our partners in HRM on various projects. We don't treat every municipality exactly the same. The ability for HRM to, for their own municipal taxes versus a rural area which has a smaller tax base certainly goes into, and as well, HRM has the ability to identify its own priorities and pursue its own infrastructure and resources, and sometimes we're asked to kind of come, if we're able to the table at the last minute. But it is something that we do know that particularly for some communities, like you said, there may be one rink or one pool or one community center versus a multitude. And so that makes, to some of the comments we've heard earlier, that makes making sure that facility is accessible and open and in good shape even more important.
Emily Kerr with just over 3 minutes.
Thank you for that response. I have another group I'm going to give a shout out to, Annapolis County Outdoor Sports Society, ACOS. I'm going to table that document, but another world-class facility in Bridgetown. The regional office is well aware of the facility. They're concerned about a number of things, but they're trying to attract bigger events, and that's to my previous question about the event strategy and how rural communities and groups can access that strategy and encourage, it makes sense that most larger events go to our capital cities for all kinds of reasons, infrastructure, accommodation, et cetera, but how could this group and other groups in rural Nova Scotia access that strategy or that funding to bring larger events to their communities? Thank you.
Deputy Minister Huston.
Well, two things. First, I'll just take the opportunity to mention this fund, but I don't think it's what you're talking about. We do have a community festivals and events fund that groups can apply for. It is typically quite small. We're talking like $5,000 to $10,000, and that's not what you're talking about. I just wanted to take that opportunity because I know a lot of different groups do access that, and it is very important, whether it's a small parade or a community concert series. In terms of some of the larger events and investments, it is absolutely something that we're very keen on is shoulder season or off-season events and outside of just the metro area or even outside of just, like, say, Sydney. So the more that we can look at those opportunities, the better. And I would encourage that group to continue to keep working with our department, but it often comes with what's the idea, what's the concept? And again, we can only provide up to so much. So, and most groups know this, but not coming to the province looking, we can't be the sole funder. We are looking for what's the partnership with other partners, either private sector or other levels of government that can help make a project happen.
Emily Kerr with 1 minute.
Thank you.
Nice of you to give me a minute.
No, I wish or was hoping to see funding asked this year. I know the department's done a lot of good things. It's affected our community positively in a number of ways, but increasingly these facilities and these groups have become a source of inspiration and hope and a distraction from stress and anxiety beyond the health benefits, preventative health, mental health supports, et cetera. So just wanted to thank you for coming today, and I'll always push for more funding. I know the value of a dollar growing up on the farm. I know the value of a taxpayer dollar, but like I said, for those reasons, there's plenty of support to increase funding to these 3 programs in particular. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you, MLA Kerr. And we will move back to the NDP Caucus with MLA Lachance.
Thank you. So I want to circle back to some of the things you discussed in your opening remarks around EDIA and working with diverse communities and responding to sort of the evolution of different communities and different cultures in the province. So, very specifically, I was wondering if you're able to tell us how much across all of the various grant programs has been spent in support of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community in the past year.
Deputy Minister Huston.
I can't tell you that now, but I think there's some work that we could do as a department to start to pull some together things. So I would just say that we can definitely articulate where that direct projects would say coming from a group that is either representative of that community and has applied for funding or another organization that has applied for programs and services that might be of use to that community. Then there would be broader things that I think are, so we'll focus on getting information for those because, you could lump and you could, and say like, okay, well, a rink, but we won't go there. We'll just focus in on sort of those direct programs and we can provide that information to the committee.
MLA Lachance.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think the sort of direct funding to communities or organizations focused directly on the community would be great. And, I was really struck in your opening remarks when you talked about healthy communities needing gathering places. And, so in your EDIA work, I'm wondering about how you do the development and the community outreach if that community is not as well represented or as and so I could think this could apply to lots of different newcomer communities, for instance, but specifically, for the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, I mean, we are lacking, I would say, in Nova Scotia in a lot of the supports that exist in other provinces for the community. So, for instance, like we don't have a community center here or in Sydney, or we don't have a provincial network of organizations and community groups, which exists in lots of other places. And so I guess I'm wondering how you ensure that communities who may not be necessarily stepping up, although, certainly I assume there'll be some funding reflected in the numbers you give me. How do you ensure that we're making a difference in the lives of those communities?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a part of it is, well, as much as possible, I think key in terms of as we design some of our programs, like we underwent a program review of our various 77 programs and kind of made sure that we wove EDI in throughout. And the key part of that is first voice. So it's having staff that represent community, the LGBTQ2S, as well as making sure that we're talking with key organizations that represent the community. So that's a part of it in terms of overall, because we do, whether there's specific programs, like it's, helping support, say, Pride, and we talked last time around sort of opportunities for Pride tourism, and but then there are the broader program initiatives that we have, and how do we weave that in to make sure that groups that might not have traditionally always accessed the programs know that they can, and it is for them. So I think another good example would be around the LGBTQ hockey tournament that was held. That's a great example of something that we would like to support, right? So it's a great point, and I think it's something that we have been focusing on and we will continue to focus on.
Mr. Greenlaw, did you want to make a comment or?
Yeah, I would just say too, the department has, and like a lot of government departments, a lot of training of staff on bias. And so, that's really crucial, is that government or the program officer needs to understand their bias, where they're coming from when they're meeting with groups that they're not accustomed to working with, and how to approach that. I would also say that just to manage expectations is that it's getting people to self-identify in our surveys about who we're supporting is a challenge. So it's easy to identify, we gave $50K to $50,000 to Pride, or we helped this Mi'kmaq organization, et cetera. But the usage demographics are more challenging to get. So I just want to manage that.
Thank you, Mr. Greenlaw. Emily LaChance with 450.
Okay. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of points. One is this issue around having first voice amongst staff, which obviously having a diverse and inclusive and representative public service is important. It's something that we've all been working towards for decades. But I do think there's a difference between having first voice and having representation as a person versus actually having policy capacity and responsibility. So, I've spoken before about that there used to be a manager position in the department, tasked with, developing, policy knowledge and engaging with the 2S LGBTQIA plus community and developing programs to respond. And that position, as far as I understand, no longer exists. So I guess I'm wondering if you can confirm that. Is there a program officer or manager position that actually has this community as part of of their work plan, and thus have workplace deliverables rather than just being a person in your organization? And you talked about working with key organizations and communities. So do you have a standing advisory committee around 2S LGBTQI plus issues with external stakeholders? Now, I'm not talking about the public service employee network.
Deputy Minister Huston.
In answer to your first question, I don't know. We don't have a position now, and I'm not aware. Since I've been for 4 years with the department, we have not had one. I didn't come in, and I didn't know of one. So that's helpful to know. And your other point is that, no, we don't have a standing committee. So those are two things that I will take back for further consideration, for sure.
MLA LaChance. 3.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think that would be great because I think, I mean, that's, what's needed to build capacity. And so I can certainly tell you that that position was in place. Well, actually, I'll have to double check, but let's just say like 2010, 2011 through to at least 2013, and somehow disappeared under the previous government. So, I do think that was a really positive step. And I feel like we've lost ground, actually, in terms of how the community is supported in Nova Scotia. And I'm wondering, what other emerging communities that you're engaged with in terms of looking across, Nova Scotia and how Nova Scotia is changing, and who you're just probably how do you know you're not hearing from folks, and then how do you connect with folks?
Deputy Minister Huston.
No, thanks for those questions. And that is something that we are very aware of and we have focused on in terms of the changing demographics of Nova Scotia. So, we are striving to always do better with those historical communities that are in our province, but particularly those that are newcomers. I know that our programs, because when I sign off on some of these approvals, it's very interesting and also very positive when I see different organizations that we've never funded before, whether it's community cricket matches to various different cultural festivals. We are seeing an increase in that, and it's certainly something that we are prioritizing. A part of this government's focus has been on welcoming communities, particularly in rural Nova Scotia, for how do we ensure that if we are trying to attract, say, professional healthcare workers, whether they're from other parts of Canada or international, how are we ensuring that when they are here, they have access to the resources and welcoming communities? So that is something that we are seeing more of, and it is something that we are actively working to make sure that we support.
MLA Burrell with 34 seconds.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
We will move over to the PC Caucus with MLA Taggart.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just wondering if you could give a few comments on what the role of our local government or municipalities and the community organizations play in collaborating with the department to ensure funding for our rinks and, our rink projects. Yeah.
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks for that. So, yeah, I think as we've had a chance to discuss a little bit today, is that it varies across the province in terms of, say, who is responsible for these facilities, whether they're rinks or they're other recreational or cultural facilities. Not only who, say, might own the property, but who is responsible for operating them, whether it's a non-for-profit society or it's the municipality itself. And then there are various levels of funding, support, or projects that we are approached for as a government. So some of them might be, under the Rink Rehabilitation Fund. It's direct funding from the province they can apply for. We need to see matching funds, et cetera. Others are more major projects, whether it's a new recreation facility or something of that matter. And then that's a much broader conversation. But, for example, some of these projects over the last couple of years are a third. So we're looking at federal investment through federal funding programs, municipal investment, as well as provincial. The other part of this that I think that is very an important aspect, and Bill touched upon this earlier, is around operating. In some ways, it's easy to build a facility or expand a facility. It is much more difficult to ensure that you are able to operate that, particularly as operating costs go up, staffing costs go up. And so one of the things that we do look at is, as a part of our funding, is are we immediately creating a burden for communities if we build something? So part of our analysis of when we go into making funding decisions is also working with groups to make sure that what they're proposing is sustainable and it's realistic. And we, as Bill mentioned, we have a lot of experience working with a lot of different groups. So someone in Cape Breton might not know about a project that happened down in Shelburne or Yarmouth, but we do. And we can share with them to say, okay, you're looking to build something similar. Here's what we learned, and here's what's proven to be successful in other places of the province. And why don't we look at doing your project a little bit differently to ensure that you can operate this sustainably going forward?
Mr. Greenlaw.
I just add that if you think of the system, so it's a dialogue and a conversation between the program officers and my regional managers, the owner or operator of the facility or that's the proponent for the funding grant, and also with the municipal unit. So we do a sort of that systems approach. So, if the municipality is not going to sustain this asset into the future, likelihood that they would score lower on our funding, on our scoring grid. So it's really a partnership in community and trying to maximize both the scarce dollars that municipal units have with our scarce dollars and the scarce dollars that you, as I mentioned, from your bake sales or your cookie sales or whatever the case may be. So we try to maximize those investments. And again, we always try to figure a way to solve the problem as opposed to looking inside the box and say, no, that doesn't fit exactly the way it's here. But we try to problem solve and work with community because we know that those things are important. And it is that system networking approach to do it.
MLA Ritzy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And really, I guess my next question, or my first question, would be around the evolving needs of communities and organizations, and especially groups for sure. So just curious, how does the department adapt its strategy to meet those evolving needs?
Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks for that question. It ties in somewhat to MLA LaChance's question too. So, things aren't static. Nova Scotia is growing as a province, and the folks that are moving to Nova Scotia is changing as well. And so, a part of our mandate is to make sure that we are serving communities the best that we can. And so that means really talking to and hearing first voice from community about what is important. And it is also important that we're not just hearing from the same organizations that might have traditionally always accessed our programs. And we're seeing that particularly, I would say, a great example would be the influx of Indian students, Bangladeshi students into Cape Breton. And the need for them, not just for, say, things like housing, but also recreation opportunities and cultural opportunities. We're also seeing as population growth continues in the province, and particularly in sort of around Metro, but in communities such as Truro and in towards the Valley and Windsor, we're seeing an increased need for capacity within some facilities and organizations. So, where I think for a number of years, what's triggered the Ivany report, the depopulation, we're seeing that reversed in some areas. And our job has been to sort of shift our programs for one of like, how do we manage the decline to how do we manage the growth? And that means, oftentimes it's around that prioritization, which is, we might have 141 applications, but we have to figure out how best to allocate the resources that are there.
MLA Ritzy.
So that sort of leads me into my next question, I guess. What role does CCTH play in preserving and promoting culture and heritage through the Mi'kmaq Cultural Activities Program?
My apologies, Mr. Greenlaw. Did you have comments to add to the other? I missed that, or do we want to?
Just the one thing that the deputy did a great job answering that question. I would just say in order to activate and we need to develop trust, and trust needs to be earned, and that answers part of MLA LaChance's question, is that if communities or people don't trust coming to us, that then we're not going to hear and we're not going to be able to service communities. So we're very self-aware that we need to be open and welcoming and develop a trusting relationship. So all community groups will come into and ask us questions and deal with and work with our staff on the projects that they want to deal with. we have a historical issue of our historical marginalized communities with trusts, let alone newcomers coming to Nova Scotia. So this is compounded, and I think that under the deputy's leadership, we're very self-aware of our trust relationship and how to try to engage communities and develop that long-term trust. So that's just my answer to that.
And that's
Deputy Minister Huston.
That's actually a great segue into talking around the Mi'kmaq Cultural Activities Program. So this was developed, so here's a great example of how, this was designed in 2013, and it was designed in partnership with Mi'kmaq partners. And the way that it's administered is a Mi'kmaq panel reviews applications that come in and makes recommendations back to the government around whether it's artistic or community cultural development activities. So examples of this current year would be around a retreat focused on supporting mental health and well-being for Mi'kmaq fisherwomen through the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, moose camps for Mi'kmaq youth in Cape Breton and in Bear River. For example, erecting teepees on Allison Bernard Memorial High School in Eskasoni. So these are projects that came from community, are recommended by community, and are administered there. We also have, we created a program called Municipal Physical Activity Leaders. And then from hearing from our Mi'kmaq partners, they said, well, we would like those in our community as well. So luckily the acronym is still the same, but they're Mi'kmaq Physical Activity Leaders. And they work directly in a number of the communities to help develop physical activity programs. The other one I'll just identify is Arts Nova Scotia. It has a new Mi'kmaq Arts program where it's dedicated towards funding Mi'kmaq artists. And there's also, last year I think was our first year, or second year around, the Mi'kmaq Community Mawiomi Fund. So communities can apply for their Mawiomis, or also traditionally sometimes referred to as powwows, that they hold typically every summer or into the fall. So we now have a fund that can help support them in that regard as well. So the other thing I would just say is that we recently hired Semi Sal San, who is Mi'kmaq from Eskasoni, originally lives in Millbrook. And he acts as our Mi'kmaq Cultural Liaison Officer, directly working with communities to help them understand and access the different funding programs across CCTH.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. You timed that perfectly with 20 seconds left on the clock. So I would welcome you if you'd like to lead right into any closing remarks that either of you have. Deputy Minister Huston.
Thanks. I'll keep my closing remarks brief, just to say thank you for the opportunity to come talk about the good work we do at the department. I really appreciate the questions from the members today. And always woven throughout your questions, you can really hear the care that you have for your communities and your constituencies. So I really appreciate that. And again, leave you with, if you have any questions, or if any organizations that have questions or want to work with CCH, please don't hesitate to have them reach out directly to me, Mr. Greenlaw, or their regional staff. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We do have a couple little items of committee business, but we can take a 5-minute recess. And thank you for being here today. Order. I call the Committee on Community Services back to order. We do have a couple items on the committee business today. First off, Deputy Minister Melissa McKinnon has responded with correspondence to the request for information regarding statistics on food insecurity among seniors and students. I'm just wondering if there's any discussion on that piece of correspondence. And as the clerk reminded me today, we will put that piece of correspondence on the website. Also, the meeting set for March 5th was canceled due to the return of our legislative sitting starting on February the 27th, and the topic and the witnesses have been right now rescheduled till April the 2nd. Is there any discussion on that item? Seeing none. So then, the next meeting date will be April 2nd, 2024. The topic is the Provincial Emergency Response System. Witnesses will include the Emergency Management Office, Fire Association of Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, and the RCMP. If there's no other committee business, I will adjourn the meeting.